Well, good morning and welcome to this week's Sabbatical Summit Live presentation, where we bring you live interviews with industry experts and accomplished cruisers every Friday at 12 noon to help plan for cruising adventures ahead. And these videos are on replay on our YouTube channel, Multi-Hull Central Sabbaticals, and also on our podcast, Sabbaticals Live, that you can listen through and dig in deep on some of these subjects. Today, we're really excited to have all the way from Lord Howe Island live, Peter Adams joining us, who's going to tell us all about this amazing destination. Lord Howe Island is located just under 500 miles to the northeast of Sydney Harbour, and is a World Heritage listed site thanks to its unique flora and fauna and some of the most southern reef in the world, and its incredible lagoon and surrounding mountains. So this really is quite a paradise, and it's a favourite location that I'm definitely want to visit sometime very soon. So I'll just bring in Peter here. You got us there, Peter?
I'm here.
Excellent.
Can you hear me?
All right, we're receiving you from Lord Howe Island, so the technology isn't completely non-existent over there after all. Welcome. Thanks for joining us, Peter.
Yeah, it's great to be here and speaking with you.
Yeah, fantastic. So, Peter, you're just a little bit of background. You're, I think, a former sea wind owner. I'm not sure you've still got your cat these days, but you used to have a Sea Wind 1000.
We did, yeah, Shambhala. And the very early Sea Wind people might know that Shambhala was the sort of poster child for the early Sea Wind 1000 brochures. But a great guy called Steve Sargent and his wife have bought Shambhala and are doing good things with her. Yeah.
Fantastic. And so before we get into the topic, I always like to ask, I guess, what your background is apart from the bigger cats, but where did you first get into boating or first learn to sail, I guess?
Well, my wife and I really aren't, we're come to this later in life, although we did own a laser and sail that socially, early in our married life and when we were just going out together before we had kids. And of course, life caught up with us. We didn't sail for a long time. And then it was only in more recent years that we moved to Jervis Bay. And there's a great cruising yacht club there, really welcoming people. And they got us on board. We sailed with people, we raced with people. And then it was really my wife who twisted my arm to buy a Sea Wind 1000. Fantastic.
And now you've sold the 1000 and you're at Lord Howe Island. So what takes you there, and how in North Earth do you live at Lord Howe Island?
And it's not our first island stint. We spent some time on Norfolk Island as well.
Wow.
But for many years I've worked consulting and in government, and an opportunity came along for the role here of chief executive for the board. And the board here on Lord Howe Island, they operate like local government, but also we run all of what's the equivalent to a national park, which is 75% of the island. So all of the science, all of the environmental management, and running the airport, power generation, port operations, all of those sorts of things. And so it was just too good an opportunity not to put my hand up for, and very fortunate to have been successful in getting the job and coming to live here.
Fantastic. All right, so we want to learn all about Lord Howe, the destination, and also getting over there and what to expect, I guess, if you come by boat. I guess before we get started, though, I mean, Lord Howe Island itself is part of Australia, and it's part of New South Wales, I believe. Is that right?
It is, yes.
Yeah. And what's the current situation with COVID restrictions and things?
Yeah, look, we've had a public health order which has locked down access for the island since March, and that's meant that visitors haven't been able to come. residents or anyone that is permitted to come have to go into 14 days of quarantine. And at the moment, we think that the island might be able to reopen on the 25th of September, but that's subject to health advice and a decision by the Minister for Health.
Right.
So the island's economy is entirely tourism, directly or indirectly, and so it's basically a very different place at the moment than the island normally is, with only locals here at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to bring up a map here, a Google map. Don't have any charts with me on the screen right now, but so you can see it's just to the northeast there of Sydney, and or almost directly east of Port Macquarie, and depending on the conditions, it's a few days sail over there, either from Sydney or going further up the coast a little bit to duck over, depending on the wind conditions. So do you often get people sailing over to Lord Howe?
Yeah, we do. We've got people coming through much of the time. Of course, at the moment, they're not allowed to come unless there's an emergency. And in fact, we've got a power cat that's been here for quite some months that hit, I think, perhaps a container at sea, and he's somehow stuck between Australia and New Zealand. He's a Kiwi, but we have boats coming through all the time. They might have come across the Pacific. They might have come through the Panama Canal. They might be from Queensland or New South Wales, all sorts of places. And it's always great to meet them as well with their stories.
Mm. Now, we've got an extraordinary, just one of the photographs we're going to go through as we have a chat here today. I mean, it's an extraordinary place to just look at, certainly from the air, but obviously, is it a volcanic island?
It is.
Right.
Yes, it is. It's really interesting. The left-hand side of the photo there is the southern end of the island, and that's volcanic mount. And really what you're seeing there is what was in the cone of the volcano. And on the right-hand end, the northern end, is also extremely high cliffs and very rugged. So that's all igneous rock. And in the middle is what they call calcarenite, and that's basically compressed coral reef and sand. And so it's very different geology in the middle than at either end.
Wow. Okay. And this here is essentially the lagoon where visiting yachts will take mooring or anchor, yeah?
That's right. Yeah, the lighter colour you can see is the lagoon with its fringed reef protecting it. There are 4 passages into there, but really only 2 for sailing vessels or for larger vessels. One at the north, the right-hand end, and one at the south, the left-hand end. Down at the left-hand end there, you'll see those 2 mountains, Mount Lidgebird and Mount Gower. Just to give you an idea of scale, and I think that the human mind has a bit of trouble comprehending this, but for anyone from Sydney, if you think of the elevation of Katoomba and imagine a cliff straight into the ocean, that's how high that mountain is.
Wow.
It's just amazing. So for those that might be on a mooring down at the South Passage with an 875 metre high mountain right adjacent to them, it's just mind-blowing, really. But that that light colour you can see there is all sheltered. It's quite shallow, and so we've got a variety of moorings that are available for people to use, and depending on the draft of the vessel, that sort of determines which area that you go to in the moorings. And
is it exclusively mooring, or is it anchor as well as mooring?
No, you can't anchor in the lagoon unless your boat's under 5 metres. So it's all marine park, both state and federal Commonwealth marine parks around the island, and of course Elizabeth and Middleton reefs. And it's really special corals and reef, so it's highly protected. for that reason, you have to use a mooring when you're in the lagoon. There are 5 roadsteads outside where one can anchor, and sometimes that's important for bigger vessels, or because of the fact that you can't enter the lagoon other than in daylight hours. It's simply too dangerous. So people might sail backwards and forwards until daylight, or they might go to a roadstead and drop anchor at one of the 5 spots, depending upon the wind and the lie of the land.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let's have a chat about, I guess, the Lord Howe as a destination, what you'd expect to see here, what there is to explore. You mentioned the mountain range there. I mean, is that, I understand there's a pretty, I'm not sure, a well-beaten track, but a good track for those energetic to get to the top?
There is, yes. In that photo, the mountain in the background is the tallest one, Mount Gower. And there's a route that goes up to there, but you need to go up with a guide. You can imagine going up 875 metres, and I'll try to describe where you go. Here we are flicking through. That's from Mount Gower, looking back towards Mount Lidgebird, but the route basically runs right along the edge of cliff lines, right along very narrow, rocky, I guess, backbones and so forth. So the local guides really try to assess your capabilities before they'll agree to take you up there. So it's one of the 10 best walks in the world, they say.
Wow.
It's just amazing, yeah. One of the reasons it's amazing too is that up on that plateau, so in the photo we're looking at now, it's about a 45 hectare plateau up top there.
Oh, wow.
More than, I think, 60% of the species, the flora and fauna, don't occur anywhere else on the planet but on that plateau.
Wow.
So it's you'll go up there and it's a very dwarfed, gnarly forest, and it takes you back to childhood. It feels like you're in some fairy tale land, and the trunks of the trees have lichen and moss and orchids just all over them. It's extraordinary. And there are these birds up there that nest every winter, Providence petrels. It's the only place, other than about 11 pairs over at Norfolk Island, that the only place in the world they nest. And you can be there and call in the birds. You just make this really loud noise calling out, and they just come and fly and land at your feet. It's just extraordinary. Yeah, it's a special place.
And I mean, there's been some documentaries and things done over there about the bird life. And is there a research facility regarding?
You're listening to this. That's what you're going to be doing.
Yeah, there is. We've got the board runs a research facility, and so there are always scientists coming through to do their research into not only wildlife and so on, but geology and all sorts of things. So we make that available to scientists, and it's great being in such a small place with world-class science going on, because you get to enjoy and be exposed to that rather than it going on in the background.
And also in the water, I mean, there's some pretty amazing reefs. I've got some beautiful photographs you sent through here. Some macro photography there, I see, of some dive sites.
That's a giant clam in about 3 inches of water. Just
is that right? Wow.
Standing there taking that photograph. It's yeah.
And so the scuba diving on the around the island is pretty good.
The scuba diving is amazing. The island itself has many dive sites, and there's a local operator who will take you out to all of those. They're one of the best operators I've ever come across, and I've dived a lot. The fish, and so like to swim in just huge schools of kingfish, and we have Galapagos whaler sharks. So you can't see them anywhere else in Australia. They only occur at seamounts, but they're really quite friendly sharks, and they'll just gently swim around you. And there are some people who get a bit freaked about that, and as soon as they get in there with them, they're just mesmerised. So it's an extremely healthy coral reef system, the most southerly in the world, and it has dive sites that are hugely diverse. Each one is quite different. And then when if you get the opportunity and the weather's right, you can go to Ball's Pyramid. And Ball's Pyramid is about 20 kilometres off the southern end of the island. That's the photo of Ball's Pyramid. 575 metres high, I think. It's the tallest volcanic, what do they call it? I forget the term now in the world. It's only a couple of 100 metres wide at the base.
Wow.
And 545 or 575 metres high, and it's just covered in seabirds. And so the diving out there is spectacular as well. And just being so far from anywhere and diving is quite an experience most people would never forget.
Mm-hmm. I've got another image here of a little cave or swim through here. What are you looking at there?
Yes. Yeah, look, the eye. So on the eastern side of the island, there's the Admiralty Group, and one of the biggest island there is Roach Island. So that's the Eye of Roach, and there's lots of diving around there, but also people can go out in a boat and snorkel through there. And so as you snorkel through with the tide, there'll be schools of fish, and it's just amazing.
Fantastic. And what about facilities actually on the island, Peter? I mean, there's little resorts and things there, and as far as getting food and those sort of things, what tell us about actual on-island facilities?
Yeah, look, there are resorts. They tend to be better described perhaps as lodges, and they're low key and really amazing. In fact, one of the facilities here, and they're all really good, and they're targeted to different sorts of people. But one of them has been nominated the last 3 years. It was first for 2 of those years and second for 1 of those years as the TripAdvisor Best Hotel in Australia. And so here we are. With hotels that don't have the sort of facilities you'd expect in a 5-star hotel. What you've got is that they're nestled in the palm trees. They're incredibly low key. Food and the quality of cuisine on the island is, I think, extraordinary. The number of really accomplished chefs on the island is amazing. So there'll be places that range from really the sorts of units that you might have enjoyed in your childhood. It's got an old world feel about the island, right through to much more luxurious places. So there are choices. There's a couple of small sort of food shops, a supermarket and food shops. There are cafes and restaurants, but they're not open every day. It might be you've got to check up. It's Wednesday night, who's open tonight, and make a booking. So it's an extremely low-key place with only about 360 residents, and there's a cap on the number of beds on the island, so it's capped at 400. So the busiest day of the year, you're probably on the beach by yourself, or maybe a handful of other people.
Yeah, wow. And I understand there's not motorised transport, or there's limited motorised transport on the island. You get around on bicycles and that sort of thing. Is that right? Or? Yeah,
look, there are cars, and so we've only got about 11 kilometres of road on the island, and there are cars and some buses to run people around, and people have their Hilux utes and so forth. But by far the most common vehicle is a bicycle and people walking. So I think I was talking to Macca, who hires bikes out here one day, and I said, "You must be busy." And he said, "Yeah, I've got 300 bikes out today." And so it's incredible in that way. And all the roads are really narrow with these great big banyan trees and palm trees just completely covering the skyline, so that you feel like you're going through sort of a rainforest tunnels in many of the roads.
Yeah, fantastic. And so you mentioned there's a little supermarket, so a visiting yacht could go and get provisions and get food and essentials to stay on board. And if they wanted to, they could potentially spend a night or two in a lodge or so there if they wanted to.
Yeah, they definitely could. You do need to book ahead. The island can, because of the limit on the number of beds, sometimes depending upon when it is you want to arrive, you might have to make sure that there's beds available. But it'd be encouraged for people if they want to have a little bit of luxury and enjoy themselves and not be bobbing around, especially if the wind's from the southwest. The lagoon's sheltered, but it can be a little bit disturbed. It'd be great to do that. Also, just for people to maybe go on some tours and do that. I wanted to make the point that the island's entire economy depends upon tourism. So yachties are really welcome. It's got a great history with yachties, but it goes down really well if you just contribute to the economy a bit and help out the locals by getting a guided tour to Mount Gower, or shopping locally, or going out to dinner, or staying somewhere.
Yeah, excellent. So why don't we talk about, I guess, the logistics of coming to the island? And we are getting some questions come through, which I'll touch on shortly. So when, I guess, is there a better time of the year for a yachty to come and visit? Is there a favourite month or period to visit?
Yeah. Look, Lord Howe's a great place to visit year round for different reasons. So if you're a bird watcher, there are different ones at different times and so on. But for a yachty, I think it was Ian Kiernan said one time, avoid the Tasman in winter. So it's probably good advice. Not only is it one of the more challenging seas in the world for passengers, the lagoon itself, where you'd be moored, does get a bit of chop, I guess, when it's the southwest. So that's the prevailing wind through winter, and in the summer the prevailing wind is more northeast. So spring, summer, autumn are great times.
Yeah, that's good to know. So spring and summer, and just looking, I was actually going to bring up, having a look at what the conditions are just today, to because we're now just into spring, and bring up our windy screen here. So we've got Sydney down here, Lord Howe over here. So you've got south easterly starting to blow through there, and that's what we're looking at there. It's about 17 knots there at the moment. So obviously working out where you come from down south and then coming back at that time of the year is not too bad. As summer builds, Peter, like later in the season, what are the prevailing winds you tend to see there over the summer months?
Yeah, look, in summer months it tends to be nor'easterly, and we're a fair way south to be too influenced by tropical lows. Having said that, we did have subtropical or ex-tropical cyclone Uisi come through in February. So that was a pretty major event. But the summertime is probably not unlike, I guess, the New South Wales coast in terms of prevailing winds at the same time of the year.
Yeah. So you have more nor'easters come through than what we're seeing there at the moment, and the cyclone events down there. Mind you, you've had a couple of close, well, like you said last year, but also I think this year before there was a close call too from memory from some of our friends sailing through there en route to New Zealand. But is it a fairly rare event to have cyclones that far south?
Yeah, look, they're always well, they're ex-tropical cyclones while they get here because the water temperature isn't warm enough to perpetuate what you call a tropical cyclone. Having said that, Uisi still had the same sort of wind strength and the same form and shape as a cyclone. So the eye of Uisi last year went right over the island, and It was interesting. There were tourists that emerged just as the sun rose. All the wind just dropped, and it had been blowing its head off all night. And my staff arrived at 6:30, and they were out there sort of cutting up trees to clear roads and all those sorts of things. And there were tourists walking around everywhere. And I went around saying, look, get back to your cabins because we might only have half an hour before the eye of the storm has passed and we get the wind from the exact opposite direction. So we did get about 4 hours in the eye before it raged, and different damage occurred there because the trees had been under attack from one direction and then suddenly it came the other way. So even though I said a little while ago that it can be a bit like the East Coast, what's different is that we don't have that effect of the land warming during the day, creating that sort of onshore wind. We're really subject to basically the oceanic wind patterns. So cold fronts coming through, southerlies, those things affect us, but we don't get that sort of diurnal change so much. In fact, typically in the afternoon can be the nicest time of the day as opposed to, let's say, a South Coast beach that might have strong winds in the afternoon in the summertime.
And we should also probably mention the seamounts on the way over. I'll just bring up, I think they're sort of shown here on our Google map, but there are some patches that rise out of the sea here that make some lumpy seagoing conditions on the trip over. Is that right? Yeah,
definitely. And it's good to try to avoid those. Most people say that it's like they're a magnet, you know. You set out to avoid them, and it's like as if you're being drawn towards those. So being aware of the East Australian current is important. So for example, if you were heading from Sydney and you headed north of those seamounts, you may well still find yourself drawn across them, and then the seas get steeper and more difficult around those mounts.
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting to look at the current movements as well as wind movements when you're planning that passage. And I think there's some good information on the Med-Eye. I was going to try and bring that up to have a look at that area around current movements because it's quite fascinating when you see it. But I'll see if I can bring that up in a little bit. So let's say you made passage over there. It's probably a good 3-day run from Sydney or Coffs, and and you have to. So take us through a yacht arriving for Lord Howe Island. What they have to consider.
Look. Actually, if I can start with before even arriving. So obviously, most of the people listening today will be aware of all the sorts of preparation that you need to take, but it's good to not take the Tasman for granted. You know, it's quite possible to get severe weather and so forth, but it's such an amazing passage that everyone that comes said that you know, it's so worth it. Having said that, we've got, you know, this is a World Heritage Island. It has all sorts of species here that don't exist anywhere else, and so biosecurity is incredibly important on the island. And so one of the things that's it's just actually changing at the moment is that there'll be stricter biosecurity requirements for any visiting vessels, and some of that requires things to be done before you even leave your port of departure. So those are still being just sort of nailed down, but things like putting rodent baits in your vessel, and that's quite highly specified when that needs to occur and what to use, as well as a range of other things. So if we just eradicated rodents from the island. It was just over 100 years since the first rodents, ship rats, arrived. And so mice, when I say eradicated, we formally can't say that yet. We've still got a survey period to complete of 2 years, but we've just gone over a bit over 300 days now with no sign of rodents. And those rodents and other invasive species have caused the extinction of a whole lot of species of plants and animals. And so we don't want more to be extinct. And our World Heritage listing is based upon its outstanding biodiversity. So if you're looking and you think, oh, why do I have to do that? There are really important reasons. It's in fact, can I quote Attenborough? And I'll just have to read this. David Attenborough said, Lord Howe Island is so extraordinary, it is almost unbelievable. Few islands surely can be so accessible, so remarkable, yet so unspoiled. So that's why biosecurity arrangements, and I guess if you were sailing to the Galapagos, you also have really strict rules. It's a bit like that. The other things, I guess, is making sure you book a mooring before you come. And of course, you don't know exactly when you'll arrive, but we can work with that. For a start, your departure might be delayed by weather windows, or you don't know how long the passage will be, but it's important to book. And we can be booked out at times. We've got 16 moorings. But for example, in November, we've got the barbecue rally. So all of our moorings are booked out already for that. They come over and have a barbecue at Ned's Beach, and we can have everything from 32-foot cruising yachts through to Sydney Hobart boats arrive for the barbecue rally, and just the usual planning ahead for any significant passage. So that's before you leave. We've talked about the passage itself, but I should perhaps mention that Elizabeth and Middleton reefs, so about 100 kilometres to the north and then further north again, just got these amazing, extremely remote seamounts, but they're atolls that very few people ever get to go to, and you have to be extremely well prepared to go there. But if a lot of yachties that come from Brisbane or Queensland come via there, and then some people that come from Sydney tend to add that on to their trip before they return. But arriving, that was your question. I mentioned before, you can only come into the lagoon in daylight hours. We have a port operations manager, and the VHF 12 and 16 are monitored 24/7. So someone, RMS person or police officer, will talk to you, and they'll guide you right into to where your mooring is. They'll give you all the information. They'll help you safely navigate the passages, and that's important for any lagoon entry. I mentioned the roadsteads before. They don't tend to get used much, but they're always there. So if you had to shelter in the, out of the weather, before you could come into the lagoon, they're available. And we've got moorings that basically, we've got deep draft moorings for boats that draw more than 2.5 metres, and then we've got other moorings in our North Passage and other areas that are for boats that draw 1.5 to 2.5 metres. There are costs of using the moorings, and they include the use of the jetty, the laundry, shower facilities, availability of water, and all those sorts of things. So there's a cost involved there, and there's also a visitor levy for arriving. So if you flew in by plane, you pay a visitor levy. If you come in by boat, you also do. And sometimes yachties might think it's a bit expensive at $50 a night for a mooring. But when people on the island are paying, hundreds a night, and those moorings actually cost a lot more to maintain throughout the year than any revenue. It's quite reasonable for such an iconic location. What else? Water and fuel is available on the island, and on the website, I'm not sure, Brent, if there are some links I provided, but the board's website has information packs and things for visiting vessels. But you can certainly refuel diesel or ULP or whatever. Someone told me that our ranger said to tell people to make sure they bring a tender. And I thought, why on earth would I have to say that to cruising yachties? But he said, you'd be surprised how many racing yachts arrive without a tender. So your moorings will be offshore, and they could be roughly about 1 kilometre from the shore, even though you're in this beautiful lagoon. It's quite a vast lagoon, and if the wind comes up, it can be quite a choppy ride back to your boat.
Yeah, so, now we've got some questions on this, and I don't want to cut you short there, but I think a lot of people are interested about the lagoon and staying in the lagoon. We'll go through a couple of these here. I think Jenny asks, hey Jenny, is it true that when winds get up in the lagoon, it can be impossible to get back to your boat in a dinghy unless you have a motor of more than 10 horsepower?
Look, I wouldn't say the 10 horsepower, but I have seen in my time some people not get back to their boat, and in fact, we had some people just sleeping down at the aquatic club one night because they couldn't get, but that had to do with the chop. So the lagoon isn't deep, and as you can imagine, with a shallow lagoon, you can get a short, sharp chop across the island. And another night, I think there was a call went out for if anyone had a bed in their house for some yachties that just simply couldn't get back to their boat. So yes, it can occur. It's not very often, but that's true.
And at high tide, Brett went over there from our office last year and said at high tide it can get a little bit lumpy in the lagoon as well.
Yeah, look, I'm not sure whether Brett's a bit soft, you know.
Well, he doesn't have a right to reply, so.
He was in a catamaran, you know, and near them were some monos that probably didn't get a lot of sleep. Yeah, he was there when the wind was, I think from memory, coming from the southwest, and it can get a bit bumpy. In my opinion, if you're on a multi-hull, not an issue. But it is a lagoon that's about 1 kilometre wide and over 6 kilometres long. So there's a bit of fetch there. Yeah.
And again, as this come down to the time of the year, it might be in more of those summer months when the westerlies slow down that it's smoother waters over there.
Better, yeah, but that's right. Look, the winter months, it's an onshore wind in the lagoon most of the time, whereas it tends to be coming in that photograph that you've got up at the moment on the lower right-hand side. You'll see those cliffs there that are around 250 metres high. So they tend to shelter the North Passage moorings.
Right.
And but the wind on an island, it's surprising, it can whip around the mountains. So on the mainland, you might think you're sheltered, and here you think you're going to be sheltered in a certain spot, but it doesn't always work out that way just because of the wind wrapping itself around the fairly steep terrain.
Sure. We had another question here from Jeff. G'day, Jeff. Can you stay in the lagoon during passing fronts, and up to what wind strengths?
Look, I think you can stay in the lagoon up to any wind strengths. This boat that is out there that's been here for some months, he is on a mooring behind what we call Rabbit Island, Blackburn Island. He's in a 60-foot power cat that's got, quite a lot of windage. and he's weathered 60 knots there, and he only told me yesterday that it wasn't a problem. We have had a boat in my time. They felt they dragged their mooring, but it hadn't. But they had a bit of a panic, and we had people racing out in the middle of the night to assist them. But I would think that's where I'd want to be in those sorts of extreme weather conditions. When it comes from the south and the southwest, it is onshore, but you've got the fringing reef that's taking the major swell out of it. So, you could get a 0.5 metre swell or or 0.5 metre wind-driven chop coming across the lagoon. It's more the gusts that might affect you.
Right. We've also had a question come in here. Do many yachties make the passage from the north to the south, i.e. from Southport or from Coffs? Where do you see most of the visitors arriving from?
Yeah, we do get a lot come from north down to south. I'm just trying to think. There's a chap that runs a podcast, the sailing podcast from Brisbane. I just can't remember his name. He came through a little while ago. They came from Brisbane and went via Elizabeth and Middleton Reefs, Lord Howe Island, and then down to Sydney. Probably, anecdotally, I think there'd be more coming from Sydney and New South Wales, but there's still a significant number from north. A lot of boats go straight across from those sort of ports in the mid-north coast, so they might come from there or cruise up the coast and then head out.
Now, I found an image here. This is on Windy, actually, of currents, which is worth having a look at. I'm not sure how accurate they are, but it is a good indication of what you're looking at. See the East Coast currents ripping down there, and that's about 2.5 knots in the peak there. But swirling around some of these seamounts, so it's quite interesting what the currents can do from where you're making your passage from.
That's right, and of course later as we get into the summer, more the EAC becomes more the dominant current. But so that's a really useful tool. Just looking at that for the period that you're thinking of the passage.
Yeah. We've had a few other questions here too, just around getting access to dive and snorkeling sites. Jeff's asked here, can you take your dinghy to some of the dive sites? Are there mooring buoys in various dive sites, or what do you recommend there?
Yeah, look, let me talk about dive sites separately from snorkeling sites. So definitely dinghies are a great way to do snorkeling. There's some really good snorkeling just from the land here, but if you've got a dinghy, you can get to some wonderful snorkeling sites in and along and around the edges of the lagoon. So each of those sites are very different from each other. You'll get very different types of corals, and so they're well worth ranging around a bit and trying out each of the spots. And generally there are these pink public moorings that not only you can tie up to, but they're a bit of an indicator. If there's a pink mooring, there's good snorkeling, because we've got a few commercial operators who take their guests along to those same snorkeling spots.
Right.
So I always say to people, if you see a pink mooring, go there. The dive sites, there's some dive sites in the lagoon. And in fact, there's one called Comet's Hole. It's and another one that are both freshwater springs that come up in the lagoon. And they don't have, we have extraordinary visibility in the water here, but comparatively speaking, they have less viz, but a lot of life at them. And there's some buoys at those. But the other dive sites tend to be outside the lagoon and around the other parts of the island. So if I was in a 2.6 metre dinghy, I wouldn't go around to the Admiralty Isles unless it was quite calm. It just depends on the vessel you've got. But you can certainly get, in that image there, you'll see the line of the breakers. And you can get out to all of those dive sites. It drops away to about 18 metres there. And you can easily, you can actually anchor out there, and you could dive in some great spots just using your dinghy. But I'd recommend also going to Pro Dive, because they just know the best spots to go. They'll point out all of the really unique marine life, and so yeah, by all means dive under your own steam, but I'd highly recommend getting the guides.
Yeah, that's good advice. Jenny's asked again here, is there much coral bleaching over at Lord Howe?
Yeah, look, a great question, Jenny. We have had a couple of coral bleaching events in the last couple of years, and the lagoon temperatures summer before last, and we had the two of the driest seasons on record in 140 odd years of keeping records. Both those years, we did get bleaching, and that's studied quite closely. Compared to other places, though, it's extraordinarily healthy reef. So I think some of the coral researchers who were here, I said, well, how healthy is the reef? And they said, well, 80% of the coral is not affected by any sort of disease or is healthy. And I said, is that good? And they said, oh, good, that's almost unheard of. So if you looked at any little lump of coral, it's 80% of that is in peak health. But the bleaching is a worry as water temperatures rise and so forth. And so it's being monitored closely. It's also really interesting. So I've cruised a fair bit up in Queensland, and we've found some amazing snorkeling and diving up there. But you have to search a lot to find the really good spots. Here, just wading off the beach and you'll see, corals and marine life just everywhere. So good news and bad news on that front, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it seems to be a problem everywhere. So it's sounds on average you've got a pretty good selection over there to jump into, which is nice to hear. Some of the spots in Queensland you hear certainly mixed reports these days. I mean, we still do a lot of diving and snorkeling up around the Keppels when we get up there every year, and it's amazing the regrowth coming through so quickly. So it's it seems to go up and down. But we've got a few more questions here, Peter, if you don't mind us digging in here a little bit. I've got a question here from Jeff. Welcome, Jeff. Are skippers able to plan and discuss their passage, such as wind and weather plans, with any of the Lord Howe Island Authority, or at least obtain up-to-date information?
Yeah, look, you can certainly talk to the Lord Howe Island board about your trip and bookings and so forth, and the lagoon. We would stop at giving advice about the passage itself, other than the biosecurity things that you need to keep in mind. Simply because the board isn't an expert on your vessel or the condition of the Tasman Sea at that time and so forth. So I'd encourage you to talk to the experts on that. But certainly we can. I'm, as the CEO of the board, we get a lot of yachts through, but the numbers aren't such that they discourage me from talking to anyone that's interested. So if you want to have a chat, ring up the board and say, is it possible to talk to Peter Adams? And it's always great to talk to yachties. I always enjoy that. So whether that's before you come or when you're here, on our website, we've got a lot of information about requirements, how you get fuel, the facilities at the jetty, those sorts of things as well. So there's a fair bit of information in those links that Frank put up earlier.
Yeah, and we'll have links, further links as well that you've supplied to us in the show notes, in the replay video on YouTube and Facebook. So if anyone wants to jump in and do a bit more research there, just have a look at the replays afterwards. What's the time? We've got a question here from Robin. You mentioned there's a big cat there's been there for 6 months. So what is there a time limit? What's the situation of how long you can stay? 6 months seems like an extraordinary amount of time.
Yeah, that's the boat I was talking about before, and that's very true. Dave from that boat, he came to the island. He left on his way to New Zealand, and they struck something, and he took quite a hole in his flybridge, and he lost all of his electronics, all of his electricals, his steering, all sorts of stuff. So he made his way back to the island, and then with the idea of repairing the boat, of course, that's been really challenging. COVID arrived. If he's been able to leave the island and come back, but he had to go into isolation. They just dried the boat out at the last few days to start to get the work done on the repair of the hull. So he's had a special approvals that have been renewed from time to time, just simply because he has no choice. Not only that, he needs crew. If he gets his Australian friends, they're not allowed to go into New Zealand, which is his destination, and then he can't fly his New Zealand friends here to crew to go back either. So when he gets the boat all seaworthy, hopefully we won't be in COVID lockdown then, but he's got his challenges, Dave.
Well, so what's the typical period of time? Like, is there a time limit on how long you can stay there?
Yeah, I can't tell you off the top of my head. Of course, there's a price, so people normally that makes them frugal about, I guess, how many days they stay there. And I just didn't look that up to see how many days. But there are people who stay for, a couple of weeks and so forth. And it really is worth doing that. We've also had a lot of boats that, not a lot, that the barbecue rally last year, I think, they had their barbecue. A couple of the boats that had to go into Sydney, Hobart, raced back out in their tenders and took off to get back to Sydney. And those that didn't were stuck here for 2 weeks longer than they thought, just because the weather wasn't suitable.
Right.
And a few of those had a pretty rough passage back.
And when's who supports that rally? Who hosts that rally?
It's an informal arrangement.
Yeah.
There used to be a race, the Gosford to Lord Howe Island race and so forth. And this one, I can't tell you how to get on. I could look it up and find out how you get onto that, but it tends to be oversubscribed and people just turn up at that time.
Yeah, right.
It's not a race, and you'll see the boat starting to arrive and all around this barbecue just one night, and there's a lot of throwing coins at bottles of rum to raise money for the local school, the local P&C. So it's a fundraiser.
Oh, yeah. Fantastic. Yeah, great.
If anyone knows Biggles knows all about it.
Right. Well, if we find any further information on that, we'll throw in the notes as well. I had a quick question for yachts transiting to New Zealand. Not that that's easy at the moment, but hopefully before too long it'll open up again. What's the situation for a yacht going to New Zealand that's clearing out at customs? Are you actually not allowed to get off the boat in Lord Howe, or what's the situation there?
Yeah, look, I'll qualify my answers here as not being completely expert on it, but we do have she happens to be one of my staff part-time, but she also is the border security person here on the island. So my understanding, I think, is that, we can't clear people from here. We're not a clearance port, but you can, if you nominate that you're coming through here, you can stop off here.
Right.
And so the boat would be inspected when you come. And if you've come from an international destination, and that's for the sort of border security type issues, but we also do with different people the inspections for biosecurity as well. So yes, it's possible to come via here, but you need to do that and arrange that beforehand. You can't just decide partway through that, on a whim to come here. That would be viewed poorly by Border Force, unless of course there's an emergency and you just simply need to come here because of breakdown or mechanical or weather.
Yeah. We had a question come through from Jeff, and I think it's unrelated to clearing out as though you're exiting to another country such as New Zealand, but in normal circumstances, sailing to Lord Howe, can you swap crew at Lord Howe in terms of someone flying in and taking the boat home? I mean, I don't assume there's no restrictions in doing that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Actually, and if I could just back on Jeff's earlier question, we have a Bureau of Meteorology person, Amy, here on the island.
Right.
And Amy, most yachties talk with her beforehand, and when they're here, they liaise with her, and she'll give really good tailored advice for people. So Amy's great. So the Met Bureau has one of the few places still has a person here in place. So back to Jeff's other question. Yes, people do that. They'll arrive. At the moment, we don't have a lot of flights, but normally there are at least one flight per day in and out of Lord Howe Island, and so people do swap crews, and that's all perfectly okay.
Yeah, fantastic. And just another question there. Is there mobile coverage on the island, mobile phone coverage? What's the...
It's an interesting place. You go out for dinner and people are talking to each other. That's because we have no mobile network.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah. Dave, on that boat that's been there 6 months, I think it was Jenny mentioned, he said to me, Peter, on your webinar, you need to say that people here look up and out at the view instead of down at their hands all the time. And so the island, before my time, they actually voted to not have a mobile network. And while not everyone would agree that's good, and it does have its limitations, it means that phones are used for taking photos and then Googling and doing social media when you're back at your room within Wi-Fi range.
Right. So there's obviously
a lot of people
internet connection over
can
there.
make data calls under Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
But you'd need to be, have the right plan and have Wi-Fi access.
Right. But there's obviously decent internet over there to even take a Zoom call, obviously. So.
Yeah, it's a lot better than it was. So Sky Muster has satellite internet, and in fact, where I'm enjoying 40 megabits per second, would you believe? There's a really slow latency. It takes a little while to just sort of send things up to the satellite at first, but once it's flowing, it's great. And there are commercial, there's the ability to buy data packets and so forth on the island, and there's some Wi-Fi at different cafes and around at the beach and so forth that people can enjoy as well.
Fantastic. Well, listen, we're going to wrap it up there. We're right on the hour on time, which is great. But I think closing off on the fact that people look out and up at the view, I think is a great notion. And that's part of what we're trying to do here is take you from your phones and computers and get out on the water and start adventuring. So I think that's a great theme to finish on. Peter, given that you're in paradise, when this whole COVID thing finishes, I mean, have you got any plans to go anywhere? Or have you found it?
Look, as you can see, anyone that's got video, I'm at that stage of my life where we won't be working forever, but it's a great place to be. It's an extraordinary community to be part of as well, and so we love it here. When we eventually aren't working here, we'll go back to our home at Jervis Bay, and our plan is to buy another cat and to spend part of the year cruising and part of the year enjoying Jervis Bay. So this here is not a career building move. It's just simply because, why would you pass up the chance to be a part of a place like this?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that note, when you're ready, Peter, we've got some lovely catamarans to show you. So, and that goes for anyone. We've got fantastic new and some boats on the market right now that are perfect for this sort of trip, and that's what we can help set up. So, Peter, really appreciate your time today, and it's great to hook up straight into Lord Howe Island. Fantastic interview, and as I said to everyone, we'll put the notes and links in the show notes afterwards, and the replay will be on our YouTube channel, Multi-Hull Central Sabbaticals, and on our podcast Sabbaticals shortly. So, mate, thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you over at Lord Howe Island before too long.
Right. And I just should have mentioned too, if you're Googling, look up Lord Howe Tourism, the Lord Howe Tourism Association. I've got fantastic resources there as well for anyone that wants to look, but I'll provide you the link for that as well, Brent.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much. And we'll see everyone soon.